From Vermont Public, this is The Frequency. I'm Mary Engish, sitting in for Mitch Wertlieb. It's Wednesday, August 6th, and here are today's headlines. Vermont's main energy sources from Canada will not be subject to new tariffs imposed by the Trump administration. There were concerns that tariffs would apply to heating oil and gasoline from Canada under a new plan that went into effect on August 1st. That's because for a short time this winter, the administration did impose a 10% tariff on these products. But the policy was suspended while further negotiations took place, and now a new set of tariffs are in place. Matt Koda represents the Vermont Fuel Dealers Association. He says key energy products won't be affected because they fall under the protection of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. He says it's an important policy change.
A third of our refined product, meaning gasoline, diesel fuel, heating oil, kerosene, and propane, comes from Canada due to our proximity to the refineries in Quebec.
State officials say electricity from Hydro-Quebec will also be exempt from the new tariffs. Canadian authorities say they intercepted a group of 44 asylum seekers and 3 potential smugglers in Quebec near the Derby Line border crossing over the weekend. The Canadian Border Services Agency charged the accused smugglers for facilitating illegal entry of people into the country. The agency says that, quote, most of the asylum seekers were transferred to a refugee processing center. The agency did not immediately respond to a question about where the remaining asylum seekers are located. The CBC reported Monday that several people were expected to return to the United States. Only about 200 property owners have taken buyouts in Vermont since Tropical Storm Irene in 2011. The reason for that relatively low number is complex, says Kevin Geiger. He helped manage buyouts after Irene, and now he's a land use planner with the Two Rivers Ottaquechee Regional Commission. Tuesday on Vermont Edition, Geiger said government funding for buyouts is extremely limited.
You can't get FEMA money for a buyout unless you're in a FEMA mapped flood zone. And those maps are not always correct. Then you have to meet a cost-benefit test, so it becomes difficult to buy out a really expensive place.
Typically, the federal government through FEMA pays 75% of the price of a buyout. The state government and local agencies pay the other 25%. The Vermont Department of Health will host a free dental clinic in Hartford Village. The clinic will be held at the Cornerstone Community Center on Saturday, September 20th. Valley News reports there are no eligibility or insurance requirements to get care. Participants will have access to free oral exams, denture checks, no-drill fillings, fluoride treatments, and teeth cleanings. You can schedule an appointment ahead of time, but walk-ins are also welcome. You may also qualify for free transportation. Coming up, Vermont chose to comply with the Trump administration's order to send the federal government sensitive personal information of Vermonters who were enrolled in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. Vermont Public's Peter Hirschfeld gives us more details after this. Last month, the Trump administration told states that they had until July 30th to send the federal government the sensitive personal information of all residents enrolled in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. Democratic attorneys general in 20 states filed a lawsuit that seeks to block that order. But here in Vermont, the administration of Republican Governor Phil Scott has complied. And his decision has alarmed civil liberties watchdogs and food security advocates. Vermont Public's Peter Hirschfeld broke the story, and he joined me to talk about why the Scott administration handed over the data and what the response has been so far. First off, I mentioned it in the intro, we're talking about personal data. What sort of information did the Trump administration demand from Vermont, and why?
The Trump administration told states that they needed to send the U.S. Department of Agriculture the personally identifying information of every member of every household that has received SNAP benefits since January 1st, 2020. We're talking names, addresses, dates of birth, social security numbers. We're also talking about the itemized transaction history of every purchase that Vermonters made with their EBT cards. These are the debit cards that SNAP recipients use to make purchases with their federal benefit dollars. The reason the Trump administration says it wants this information is so that it can stamp out waste, fraud, and abuse in government programs. President Trump wants to remove administrative barriers that he says are preventing federal employees from accessing government data, including the personal information of Americans. He says easier access to that data is going to help the government detect overpayments and fraud. Not everybody buys that rationale. Data privacy experts and civil liberties watchdogs that I've talked to worry the federal government's plans for this data are far more broad, and they fear this is part of an attempt to turn Americans' data into a mass government surveillance tool.
Okay, that's a lot. 20 states, though, filed suit against the Trump administration to block the USDA from getting this data. Vermont, not one of those states. Why did the Scott administration decide to comply with this order?
So there are two reasons. The first is pragmatic. The USDA said states who did not provide the data would face sanctions. It was unclear what form those sanctions might take, but there are more than 64,000 Vermonters getting about $200 million in SNAP benefits annually. And administration officials were worried about these benefits getting reduced or cut off entirely due to lack of compliance by the state. The second reason they handed over the data is they say federal law gives the USDA the legal authority to access it. And they say since it's a lawful order by the federal government, that means the state of Vermont needs to comply.
We've been getting a lot of feedback from our listeners and folks who read your story at vermontpublic.org, including those who are automatically enrolled in this summer EBT program that happened during the pandemic. That's when families of, all kids, regardless of income, received these SNAP benefits. And they want to know if that data has been shared with the feds. Have you found out any more about that?
I don't have an answer for them right now, Mary. I reached out to the Vermont Agency of Human Services this morning to find out if that data was part of the transfer. Haven't gotten a response yet. We've also asked the state for the total number of individuals whose data was shared. Remember, this request goes back 5 years, so it could be far more than the 64,000 Vermonters receiving SNAP benefits now. No information back yet, but we hope to have that information to folks soon.
Yeah. And what are data privacy experts, food security folks, what are they saying? What concerns do they have?
The concern is, A, what is the federal government going to do with this data? And B, it's they view it as an ethical and moral breach. I talked to Nora Horton at Hunger Free Vermont. She says when low-income Vermonters shared their most sensitive personal information with the state of Vermont, it was under the understanding that that data would be used solely for gaining access to needed food benefits. In sending that data to the feds, Horton says Vermont has breached that trust in ways that are going to undermine the integrity, not just of the SNAP program, but for government-funded human services programs more generally.
That's Vermont Public's Peter Hirschfeld. You can read that full story on what happened with Vermonters' personal data at vermontpublic.org. Thanks for listening to The Frequency today. We had additional reporting from Bob Kinzel, Elodie Reed, Michaela Lafrac, and Adia Golston. Today's episode was edited by Stephanie Colombini, and our music is by Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Mary Engish. Talk to you tomorrow.
These days, there's so much news, it can be hard to keep up with what it all means for you, your family, and your community. The Consider This podcast from NPR features our award-winning journalism. 6 days a week, we bring you a deep dive on a news story and provide the context and analysis that helps you make sense of the news. We get behind the headlines. We get to the truth. Listen to the Consider This podcast from NPR.